how did Argentina end up in this mess? Collapsed economy in 2001, which I wrote about in Surviving the Economic Collapse based on my experience doing just that. 140% inflation as of this year. The process of destruction that started in 2001 still goes on till this day. This gentleman makes a good, historical approach of how this started in the first place. And this was sent to me, I think it was by Matt Bracking. Sometimes emails get confusing, but I'm pretty sure it was him. Let's check this out and then comment.
In yesterday's newsletter, I talked about how government spending drives hyperinflation using the famous example of Weimar Germany in the 1920s. Today, I'll talk about a much more recent hyperinflation, Argentina. The country is undergoing its fifth hyperinflation since 1975, currently running at 143% per year. That was, of course, a big reason for libertarian radical Javier Milei's win in Argentina's presidential election last week. Setting the stage, 100 years ago, Argentina was one of the richest countries in the world. The peso was gold-backed, and Argentina was a main exporter of beef using the newly invented refrigerated ship called a reefer. Its per capita GDP was higher than Austria, Italy, or former colonial master Spain. This all changed starting with the election of socialists during World War I. Like American progressives, they passed laws controlling factories and working hours, shutting women out of work. They established government schooling and nationalized energy and transportation, the commanding heights of the economy. Once the Great Depression hit, they had the excuse to ditch the gold standard and launch a government industrial policy that, like all socialists, backfired. Despite a near 50% devaluation of the peso, making their beef cheap, agricultural output plunged, leading to an economic crisis. This opened the door for a military coup by fascist sympathizers, including Juan Perón, and backed by Standard Oil, thank you, Exxon. The coup was initially welcomed by large crowds in Buenos Aires, but the National Socialists governed little better than the regular socialists, squeezing business and spending enormous amounts of money. For the next 44 years, Argentina was ruled by socialist generals espousing social justice, inflating the currency, promoting union takeovers, and putting regulations on small businesses that wrecked the middle class. Argentina went from one of the richest countries in the world to perennial basket case. The peso went from 2.4 per dollar to 350 per dollar by 1969, the first in a series of hyperinflations. In 1970, the peso was restored, then quickly lost 99.9% of its value again. It reset again in 81, lost 95%, again in 83, lost 98%, 1985, lost 99.9% again. Finally, in 1992, Carlos Menem restored the peso to dollar parity. It actually held up for a while, about 10 years. I was living in Argentina back then. I was thrilled to pay a taxi in pesos and get dollars back in change. I thought maybe Argentina was out of the woods. Alas, it was not. The socialists came back. They got back to work, dropping the peso.
That's actually incorrect. The socialists never left. Carlos Menem was very much a socialist. Carlos Menem was a peronista, Partido Justicialista, very much a Peronist himself. He had more of a liberal economic approach. That's why he had the convertibilidad, 1 peso and $1 parity. But Carlos Menem was a Peronist and very much a socialist populist. That would be the best way of putting it. He just ramped up government spending in spite of the parity with the US dollar. So that would be one of the things that's not so accurate, but as of the rest, it's pretty much spot on.
By 92%, then accelerating back to hyperinflation under the current Peronist. So what is next? Brought to you by Unchained. Washington is following the Argentina plan just as fast as its grubby little paws can vote new spending. In fact, our current $2 trillion deficit is almost twice in terms of GDP what it is in Argentina. So we are going even faster than the original. Unfortunately, it took decades for Argentinians to vote for change because that same money printing pays cronies, government workers, and welfare recipients, all of whom vote. Almost a third of Argentinians work for the government, another third are on welfare. America is actually getting close, with about 1 in 5 Americans working for the government, and 30% also getting welfare. Toss in cronies, and things have to get really bad before enough will vote for change. Check out this week's article on government spending.
Okay, yeah, so pretty much spot on, except for that part about Carlos Menem. Reasons why Argentina ended up in this mess, in the latest mess that we are in. I mean, I've gone through 3 different currencies in my life. In Argentina, the old peso, and it kept on losing value. So it would go from, you would buy, like I was in school, right? And you would buy like an alfajor, like a cookie candy thing, 1 peso. Then a few days later, 10. 1,000, 10, and eventually you would buy a sandwich for 100,000 freaking pesos. They would all of a sudden, I mean, the way I saw it as a child was, well, yeah, we're not using this money anymore. Too many zeros. Now we start over with this one. We go with the Plan Austral. 1 Austral, 1 US dollar. Great. This makes a lot more sense. Okay. And it soon goes 1 Austral, 10, 100, and soon enough you're buying again sandwiches for 1,000 australes. Again, wipe and start over, and that's how you end up with Carlos Menem with a new peso being 1 peso, 1 US dollar. Now, the reasons why Argentina ended up collapsing this last time, the 2001, which I feel it's just, this process that started in 2001, it's been up until now, it never got back on its feet, and many of the things you see are the consequences. So it collapsed 2001, and it just kept on sliding out of the map since then, never getting back on its feet for real. But going more to the point of why is it that Argentina collapsed, and why is it still in the mess it is with 140 inflation this year, and rampant inflation year after year. It's a miracle that people manage to still get by. Well, they kind of managed, but in a very dire way. If you look at the reasons why this ended up happening this last time, it's because even though the convertibilidad, the parity of the US dollar with the Argentine peso, yes, that eliminated inflation, but it also removed any kind of monetary policy that you could have in terms of controlling how much your currency is worth. The problem in Argentina is that every time politicians need money, they just start printing more of it in a very irresponsible manner without caring that it's just transferred to the poorest of the people. When you print money, when you create inflation by monetary emission, by printing more money, the ones that pay for that is the poorest of the poor. If you're middle class, it kind of sucks. If you're a little bit better, upper middle class, still sucks. And if you're rich or very rich, it doesn't bother you a whole lot. Inflation is not something that worries you too much. You probably have different assets, you have a diverse portfolio, and you're okay. But if you're poor, yeah, that's gonna be hitting him very hard. So even though you eliminate inflation by having a parity with the US dollar, the thing that happens also is that you become super expensive. I mean, you are working on dollars. So it got to the point in Argentina where if you were a manager, a doctor, any line of work that you had, you were making more money in Argentina in US dollars than in the United States, the country that actually emits those damn dollars. And it was more expensive for you to live in Argentina than in the United States. In dollars. Just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That just shows that the Argentine economy was losing value even when using US dollars. It just shows a lack of connection with reality. But more to the point, what happens with this is that you have a destruction of the national industry. It's not worth making anything if you're making so much money. Right? Why would you have a factory of any kind? Why would you have any kind of Argentine products if everything is cheaper brought from abroad? So Carlos Menem, populist, socialist, he kept on running that government spending. Now he could not print US dollars for each peso circulating in Argentina. There had to be a dollar. He could not just start printing pesos. No. He wasn't printing. He was just getting more into debt. So the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, he got money from, and everyone was happy to play along. I mean, that's money that eventually will go back to the same people that are printing it. So it was and it's still this day. Argentina is the largest country in terms of debt to International Monetary Fund. But this creates a situation by which national industry makes no sense. Government spending is through the roof. And when international financial crisis hit, like it did in the 90s, your neighbors have the option of adjusting because they have their own currencies. So Brazil devaluated the real a little bit. They just managed to get by. Argentina could not do that. You could not be competitive in the international market or even in the local regional market with your neighbor Brazil. What happened was that the few companies that still operate in Argentina, closed down, moved over to Brazil. It's cheaper over there with a devaluated real than with your fucking insane, more expensive than the United States economy. So it's not just that adopting US dollar fixes everything. Most of all, the key to all of this is having fiscal responsibility, not spending more than you actually produce or more than the actual country can sustain. And the government doesn't produce anything, the government just takes from the people. But even that was not enough, so what they did was go into debt more so. And in the case of Argentina, Carlos Menem, one of the things he did was privatize everything. Now, usually you would say, yes, private companies are a lot better than public ones, and that would be accurate. It's not always the case. There's things that are just not good business, and if it's not good business, no private company will do it, at least not in any honest manner. It's going to be a lot of corruption. It's going to be not fulfilling the obligations because it's just not financially profitable to do so. A private company is about making money, and in terms of the government, there's things that they have to take care of. They're just not good business. So you're either going to have someone corrupt or you're going to have an awful job, but it simply will not work because it's not good business. In the case of Argentina, they privatized the oil reserves for YPF, but they did it with a lot of corruption. It was undersold and it was not kept in proper control. The same for public transportation services. What ended up happening was that even though these companies were privatized, they were still very corrupt. They were still emptying the companies and not providing the service that they were supposed to provide, and they were just bagging the money and not doing a good job. And along with a lot of corruption from the government that should have been keeping an eye on them doing a good job as they had agreed to when they privatized the companies. Argentina sold everything they had to sell for this US dollar parity that Carlos Menem wanted to implement. It is also the case that you had foreign interests as well as local ones. In terms of foreign interests, yes, the the Monetary Fund will give you a lot of money and then sue you over it when you're not paying back, and you will have to pay back with interest. But in terms of the local economy and the local business, many of the Argentine businessmen wanted to see Argentina default, wanted to see Argentina end this US dollar parity because they had debt in US dollars. They had massive amounts of debt in dollars that were instantly liquefied and converted to Argentine pesos, which worked beautifully for them. They made a ton of money in US dollars, and all of a sudden what they have to pay back is just pesos that are worth nothing, okay? So you have a number of actors. It's not a simple answer, and we're not even getting into the political aspect of all of this. Carlos Menem, because of everything that I'm explaining, he lost the elections. And then you had Fernando de la Rúa, which was not a Peronist president. And as we know in Argentina, you cannot have a president that is not Peronist, because the Peronists are the ones that rule on the streets, the crowds, all of those masses of people, those orcs that you send to rallies and blocking streets and all of that. The streets are controlled by Peronists, and if they're not in power, they try to get themselves in power. As soon as things started getting ugly for the new government that was not Peronist, the streets started getting a lot more violent and angry, and an uprising and protests and everything went insane and looting, and the guy that was president ended up resigning. And after 5 presidents in 11 days, which is somewhat of a record, we ended up with a guy that lost the elections against Fernando de la Rúa as president himself, Eduardo Duhalde. Peronists again. So as you see, it's quite complex, but it is true that the United States is going through those same steps. Now, you're the guys printing the US dollars, but there's only so far. It's still fiat currency. It's still just a little bit of paper. And if you keep on doing this, well, when eventually it does collapse, it will do so in a far more spectacular manner than I saw it in my own. Okay, guys, so just keep that in mind. These things never end up well, but as long as people can trick themselves and make people believe that you can just print your way out of the hole you're digging yourself in, well, you just buy yourself a little bit more time, but making the fall probably a lot worse than if you had just already. See you on our next video, guys. Take care.